And we're back. We'll speak to our political roundtable in just a moment, but I want to begin with Senator Dianne Feinstein, chair, of course, of the Senate Intelligence Committee, Democrat of California. And Senator, your reaction to what you've heard thus far, particularly the ins and outs on these talking points and what seems to be the central charge, that as these emails are revealed, that the administration at various levels wanted to scrub the fact that there was a link to terrorism of this September 11th attack in Benghazi.
Well, I disagree with the conclusion. We have held 6 separate hearings. We have interviewed every intelligence head. We have read the emails. We spent a considerable amount of time with David Petraeus when he was director of the agency, with the CIA analyst involved. We will shortly be producing what I hope will be a bipartisan review. What I hear being assessed is all kinds of ulterior motives, and I don't believe they existed. And I have looked through all of the intelligence preceding Benghazi. There was no tactical intelligence, but there was intelligence to the effect that there had been prior attacks, that this was a dangerous area. You could say the security was inadequate. It was. This was not a consulate or an embassy, therefore it did not have Marines. You can question whether it should have been there in the first place. But I don't think you can question that there was malevolence on the part of the president, on the part of the Secretary of State, or anyone else. It was a very unfortunate incident that turned into be, I think, a great and very painful learning experience.
But when you see some of these emails that no doubt you already reviewed as chair of the Intelligence Committee, all of this was reviewed with Intelligence Committee members, Republicans and Democrats. At the time, nobody accused anybody of a cover-up. But you do see the talking points have from them removed any reference to terrorist groups being involved. Can't you understand the accusation that people were spinning this as something other than a terrorist attack?
Let me say this. I think the talking points were wrong. I think the talking points should not be written by the intelligence community. I think the intelligence community should not be doing talking points for members of Congress. And our report will, in essence, say that. Talking points can't be done by committee either. And these were. They were passed from one to the other, and changes were made. The White House made virtually no changes. The word consular was changed to mission, and John Brennan made a change in syntax of one sentence. That was it.
But you have the State Department pushing back on what the talking points were, and they were ultimately changed. And the White House was running that process, right, as an interagency process.
Well, as more became known, the talking points were changed. Senator McCain said, and I happen to agree with this, that when you see a group going up with RPGs and weapons to break into one of our facilities, you can assume it's a terrorist attack. Unfortunately, the word extremist was used, which is not as crystal clear as terrorist. The real-time video, which we have all seen, reveals that there was virtually no defense. The militia from Libya sent to guard the embassy disappeared the minute these people came down the street. These people just walked right into the facility. So that is the painful learning lesson that we have.
Well, there's also a political charge that is coursing through this. A pivotal moment of all of this, back in February, Senator McCain was on this program, and this was the exchange with what he thought was an actual cover-up. Watch this.
And shouldn't people be held accountable for the fact that 4 Americans
what?
died?
You said there's a cover-up.
A very dear man.
I'm just asking you, a cover-up of what?
Of the information concerning the deaths of 4 brave Americans. The information has not been forthcoming. You can obviously believe that it has. I know that it hasn't. Why did the president for 2 weeks during the heat of a campaign, continue to say he didn't know whether it was a terrorist attack or not? Is it because it interfered with the line of Al-Qaeda is decimated and everything's fine in that part of the world? Maybe. We don't know, but we need the answers.
Is that criticism warranted, Senator?
Well, I think some of it is. It was in the last of a political campaign. We've gone through all of this. Now we're going through it again. And my concern is when Hillary Clinton's name is mentioned 32 times in a hearing, that a point of the hearing is to discredit the Secretary of State, who has very high popularity and may well be a candidate for president. So I understand Republicans had a grievance because this happened a month before the election. And every effort has been made to turn it into something that's diabolical. I don't see that. And if I did, I would say it. But I don't see that.
Rand Paul says in Iowa, as he's ramping up for a presidential run, talking about Secretary Clinton, it was inexcusable. It was a dereliction of duty, he said. It should preclude her from holding higher office.
Well, I think that's nonsense. And I think the American people will think it's nonsense. This is a woman who has devoted herself to the job, who has traveled the earth, who has tried to bring countries and organizations and groups closer together. She's a builder, not a divider. And I think, I'm really sorry, because what is happening is that the credibility is being lost when these attacks take place. First on the president, now on the Secretary of State. And candidly, we have looked into this probably more than anyone in terms of time spent. And our intelligence committee will have a report, and I hope we will put some of these things to rest.
I want to ask you about the other big issue you're working on this week. That is immigration. Is there going to be an overall immigration reform bill that's passed in the Senate? I don't have to tell you, you've been involved in the markup. The pushback from Republicans is, look, we have got to get border security right, and it's got to be tough before we get to any of the business of a citizenship pathway for those here illegally.
Well, we saw in the committee, we passed 32 amendments Thursday. What we saw was a prodigious effect to say nobody could be on the pathway to a green card until the border was 100% or somehow 90% absolutely guaranteed secure. The Border Patrol has been doubled. There are nearly 25,000 Border Patrol now on the border. And intrusions have dropped dramatically. Of the fence, the Secretary of Homeland Security testified that about 300 I think close to 350 miles of fence have already been built. And there's some left to do. It's less than 50 miles. We have air resources, you have drones, you have cameras. The border has been fortified more than any time in our history. And I think that we need to move ahead with this. I think we will move ahead. I think it's our chance. If we fail this time, I think you're not going to have another chance in the next decade. So I am very hopeful. The people, the Gang of Eight, has held together. They understand the breakpoints. They're supporting one another. If that continues on the floor, when the bill gets to the floor, I think we have a very good chance of success.
Let me widen this discussion. David Brooks, as we talk again about Benghazi. You know, here this morning, and what's new this morning, the chairman of the House Oversight Committee is falling short of saying this was Hillary Clinton and President Obama's fault. But he does say the administration essentially directed the intelligence community to back off what they wanted to say.
Right. There's an underlying narrative here, which I actually think is wrong. The underlying narrative is that the CIA is this bunch of technically pure, non-political people, and then they produce a product which is then doctored by a bunch of political people, either at state or at the White House. My reading of the evidence is that a very terrible event happened at a CIA, basically a CIA facility. They went into intense blame-shifting mood, trying to shift responsibility onto the State Department, onto anywhere else. And the State Department pushed back. They said, no, it's not our fault, it was your facility. And so they pushed back and they said, why are we suddenly releasing information that we haven't been releasing so far? So the CIA was super aggressive. There was some pushback. Out of that bureaucratic struggle, all the talking points were reduced to mush, and then politics was inserted into it. So I don't think we should necessarily say this is politics intruding on a CIA pure operation.
Congressman, don't you see the muddle in all of this? that it's not so clearly Watergate as some Republicans allege?
Well, look, I'm not out to try to bring anybody down. I just want the answers. And, I look at a couple of things. Number one, who changed the talking points? These are questions that go to motivation. But I do know that Ambassador Rice went on every morning show and said this was a result of a YouTube video. This was not a terrorist attack. It was frankly told to us in a closed-door meeting in Congress by Hillary Clinton, too. And the other question, as a pilot in the military, I went to survival training, and the first thing they tell you is your country, just know, no matter how long you're in prison, your country will move heaven and earth to come get you. And it appears in this case, the country didn't move heaven nor earth to come get them. And the administration says, well, we had 7 hours, we couldn't have made it in time. And to me, that's irrelevant. What matters is you didn't know when the second attack was coming. Why did you not pull out all the stops to get some assets in place to save these 4 men or any future attack that could be happening?
Wes Moore, you're also a veteran of our wars in Iraq and in Afghanistan. That is something you hear a lot in this community, in the Special Forces community and the diplomatic community, which is, why didn't they go after our guys to try to do something? And was there enough contingency planning? It's a question I asked Ambassador Pickering, to be able to move if something like this were to occur.
Well, I think the challenge was both under contingency planning, but also coordination about who actually had the jurisdiction to send in, what was the timeline, because the fact is, I agree with you on the point that regardless of what the timeline was, there should have been contingency plans, particularly once we heard about the level of the threat. Where the challenge, though, comes in, I think this also comes into an idea of lesser included, right? Where we cannot, by trying to overstate the argument, we also undermine the argument. Where we have to also understand that at this fundamental core, that investigation should happen. There needs to be more that we can understand and a baseline that we can understand from this issue. But then we can start clouding the issue by trying to put in all these other elements, like what Senator Feinstein was talking about trying to indicate specific individuals who are responsible. That's where this issue becomes clouded. And fact is, that's when the truth also becomes very muddled in as well.
Katty Kay, a historical precedent, I think, is interesting, and I've been looking at it this week, and that's the Beirut bombing of 1983, when our servicemen were killed effectively on a landing strip there. A deadly video, the recriminations politically, the president taking responsibility. I was looking at the time, Sam Gibbons of Florida saying, I've only got 3 words, Lebanon, Reagan's Vietnam. Senator Fritz Holling saying that the deployment of American troops in this type of situation borders on the criminal. All they're doing is sitting there hunkered down at the end of a runway waiting to be killed, and on he goes. A tragedy that became a political issue. Here in Benghazi, it somehow becomes a scandal. What is the difference between tragedy and actual scandal?
It is the insertion of politics, and if you are a Republican who feels that this is a cover-up, you feel you've been vindicated this week. Democrats feel that the Republicans are trying to smear the White House with this. And I think actually for the American public, the points of whether there were 12 different versions of the talking points and the emails that were sent, that's not what concerns them, or perhaps should concern them. The bigger picture here is one about missing intelligence in Benghazi in the run-up to this attack, the fact that there were 40 separate attacks against foreigners in the 6 months before the attack against this facility. Why were those not connected? Why was the security not sufficient? Those are the issues that should concern us. Those are the issues that actually matter to American security abroad. This issue of talking points, I think, is becoming so intensely political, so confusing, that it's going to be missed by the American people and probably should be missed.
Before I go to a break, Senator Feinstein, to kind of bottom line this, if there's something you would have liked to have seen the president or the Secretary of State do differently after this broke, it would have been what?
Oh, to move faster, to say, yes, this was in fact a terrorist act. I mean, it was so evident, and
but why did they drag their
training
heels on it
camps all around there?
If you believe that, why did they drag their heels?
I can't, because I think this is a cautious administration. You see it in other respects. I respect that, but this is one instance where you know, it was what it was, and you saw it the minute you knew what happened. You knew it was a terrorist attack, and you knew these groups had camps all around the area. So,
did you think the political campaign was a factor?
Hard for me to tell, because I'm not sure what impact it would have had if someone had said from the administration, yes, our mission was attacked. We believe it was some terrorist groups. We need to identify which one. Mm-hmm. I don't see what harm that would have done to the administration.
All right. Let me get to a break here. I want to come back and talk about another big issue this week. That's sexual assaults in the military. What should be done about it? We have some key voices around the table to be able to address that. Plus this IRS story, especially with news this morning about some conflicting statements about why certain groups were targeted. We'll get the senator's reaction to that as well, and more from our roundtable right after this.